Look, I don't know what they're doing over in the Navy these days, but this is a serious joint service facility. We're training warfighters here, not administrative assistants. Maybe you'd be more comfortable back at your desk. Petty officer, the crowd of Marines, airmen, and soldiers shifted, a few of them chuckling nervously into their fists. Commander Wallace Thorne, his barrel chest puffed out against the crisp fabric of his uniform, gestured with a dismissive wave at the woman standing before him. She was of average height, with dark hair pulled back in a severe regulation bun, and a face that was more focused than memorable. She stood with a stillness that was utterly at odds with the tense, testosterone-fueled energy of the Advanced Combatives Training Center. She did not react. Her eyes, a deep and unreadable brown, remained fixed on the center of the training mat, her breathing calm and even. There was no flicker of anger, no flush of embarrassment. There was only a profound, almost unnerving, silence emanating from her. But down on the far end of the observation deck, Admiral Jonathan Vance, a man whose face was a roadmap of forgotten conflicts and hard-won wisdom, leaned forward slightly, his gaze sharpening. He didn't see a clerical worker accidentally shuffled into the wrong training evolution. He saw the subtle shift of her weight balanced perfectly on the balls of her feet. He saw the worn leather of her utility belt, scuffed and molded not by parade grounds, but by constant, unforgiving use. He saw a ghost he hadn't seen in a decade, a ghost from a moonless night over a mountain range that officially did not exist. If you believe that true strength doesn't need to announce itself, that competence is its own deafening roar, type silence in the comments below. For Thorne, however, the woman's lack of response was not a sign of discipline, but of weakness, of fear. He saw it as an invitation to escalate, to make his point more forcefully for the audience he had gathered. "This isn't a game, petty officer," he continued, his voice dripping with condescension as he circled her like a predator. "Out there, in the real world, hesitation gets you killed. A lack of aggression gets your team killed. You have to project power. You have to dominate the space. You stand there like a statue. What happens when a 250-pound insurgent kicks in a door? What do you do then? Freeze up? File a complaint?" The laughter was louder this time, more confident. The commander was putting on a show, and they were his willing audience. He was reinforcing a comfortable, time-worn prejudice that the true, gritty work of combat was the exclusive domain of men built like him. This woman, with her quiet demeanor and unremarkable physique, was an anomaly, an error in the system that he, as the gatekeeper of this sacred space, was obligated to correct. He stepped onto the mat, his polished boots making a stark, authoritative sound against the rubber. "Let's demonstrate. I'll be the threat. You be you be you. I'm coming through a door. React." He began to move toward her, adopting an exaggerated, aggressive posture. The woman, Petty Officer Anya Sharma, finally moved. It was not a flinch or a retreat. Her hands, which had been resting calmly at her sides, came up into a loose, neutral guard. Her eyes, which had been focused on the mat, lifted to meet his. In them, there was no fear. There was no anger. There was only assessment. A calm, terrifyingly professional assessment. It was the look of a master craftsman sizing up a piece of raw material. And for the first time, a flicker of doubt, so small he barely registered it, crossed Commander Thorne's mind. He mistook her calm for paralysis. He saw her neutral stance as passivity. He believed his own rhetoric, his own performance of dominance. He decided to make the lesson physical, to use a moment of controlled contact to cement her humiliation and his authority. "See? Nothing," he announced to the room, closing the distance. He feinted a punch, expecting her to flinch back, to expose her center line. Instead, she remained rooted, her posture adjusting by a millimeter, a nearly imperceptible pivot. Annoyed, he committed. He launched a training maneuver, a sweeping leg kick designed to look impressive and knock her off balance. A movement to embarrass, not injure. As his leg swung through the air, he felt a strange sense of temporal distortion. The world seemed to slow down. He saw her body flow, not block. She didn't meet his force with force. She absorbed it, redirected it. In a movement so fluid and economical, it was almost invisible. She shifted her weight, and his extended leg, meant to be a tool of humiliation, became his own undoing. He felt a sharp, shocking impact, not against her, but from her. A precisely placed knee, delivered with the cold, calculated force of a piston, connected with the nerve cluster on the inside of his thigh. It wasn't a wild, desperate strike. It was a surgeon's cut. His entire leg went numb, a jolt of white-hot agony shooting up to his hip. His balance evaporated. His authority, his arrogance, his entire carefully constructed performance came crashing down as his body, no longer under his control, folded. He landed hard on the mat, the air rushing from his lungs in a pained, undignified grunt. The laughter in the room died instantly, replaced by a collective, sharp intake of breath. Petty Officer Anya Sharma stood over him, not with a look of triumph, but with the same calm, assessing expression she had worn all along. Her hands were back in a neutral guard. Her breathing was still even. She had simply solved a tactical problem. Commander Thorne, sprawled on the mat, his legs screaming in protest, looked up at her and finally understood. He hadn't been teaching a lesson. He had just become one. The silence that followed was more profound than any sound. It was a heavy, weighted silence, thick with shattered assumptions and dawning realization. The air, just moments before filled with condescending laughter and Thorne's booming voice, was now utterly still, broken only by the commander's ragged, painful breathing as he struggled to sit up. The faces of the onlookers were a gallery of shock. The smirks had vanished, replaced by wide eyes and open mouths. They had just witnessed something that defied their entire framework of understanding. They had seen a mountain fall. They had seen a force of nature in a 5'7" frame dismantle a man who represented the very archetype of military power, and she had done it without a single word, without a single wasted motion. Sharma did not press her advantage. She did not gloat. She simply took 2 precise steps back, creating a respectful distance, and resumed her initial posture of quiet readiness. Her job was done. The immediate threat had been neutralized. For her, the context of ego and audience was irrelevant. There was only the problem and the solution, the action and the reaction. The demonstration, it turned out, was over. It was this absolute lack of emotional follow-through that was perhaps the most terrifying thing of all. Her professionalism was so complete, so devoid of personal animosity, that it felt inhuman. It was the calm of a hurricane's eye, a placid center surrounded by utter devastation. Commander Thorne finally managed to push himself onto one knee, his face a mask of pain and disbelief. The physical agony was immense, but it was nothing compared to the psychic wound that had just been inflicted. He had been publicly and effortlessly undone. His authority had been stripped away not by a superior officer, but by the very person he had chosen as a symbol of incompetence. He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time, not as a symbol or a target for his prejudice, but as an individual. And what he saw chilled him to his core. He saw a focus that was absolute, a discipline that was harder than steel. He saw a warrior. The word echoed in his mind, mocking his earlier, hollow pronouncements. He had been talking about war fighters, and one had been standing in front of him the entire time, patient and silent, while he played the fool. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. What could he say? What excuse could he possibly offer? The evidence of his folly was throbbing in his leg and burning in the silent, staring eyes of every person in the room. He had demanded a demonstration of aggression, of power, of what to do when the door was kicked in. And she had given him one. It was a lesson delivered with brutal, undeniable clarity. It was the most perfect, ironic, and humiliating refutation imaginable. The onlookers began to murmur, the spell of silence broken. The whispers spread like fire through dry grass. Did you see that? Where did she come from? He never even touched her. They were replaying the moment in their minds, dissecting the impossible speed, the flawless technique. They were rewriting their entire perception of the quiet petty officer they had dismissed just minutes earlier. They were beginning to understand that they were in the presence of something far outside their experience. They were witnessing the quiet, terrifying competence that legends are made of, the kind of skill that is forged in places they only read about in classified reports. The kind of skill that doesn't need to speak because its actions are a language all their own, a language of pure, unassailable truth. And in that moment, everyone in the room, from the lowest-ranking airman to the now humbled commander, was fluent. The formal challenge was announced the next day, a pre-scheduled event that now carried an almost unbearable weight of anticipation. It was the Gauntlet, a notoriously brutal close-quarters combat simulation. A single operator had to navigate a multi-room structure, engaging a series of heavily padded instructors playing the role of hostiles. The goal was speed, precision, and tactical decision-making under extreme stress. It was the ultimate test of the skills Commander Thorne had so arrogantly claimed to be the sole purveyor of. When Sharma's name was called, a hush fell over the assembled trainees and instructors. This was no longer just another drill. It was an adjudication. It was the official, sanctioned response to the unofficial lesson that had been delivered on the mat the day before. Commander Thorne was present, leaning heavily on a cane, his face pale and grim. He stood at the back, a deposed king forced to watch the coronation of his successor. He had to be there. His absence would have been an admission of defeat. His presence, however, was a public penance. As Sharma approached the staging area, the contrast between her and the environment was starker than ever. The other participants had been a whirlwind of nervous energy, psyching themselves up, bouncing on their feet, their faces grim with determination. Sharma was an island of calm in a sea of anxiety. She moved with a deliberate, unhurried grace, her focus turned inward. She checked her simulated weapon, a weighted blue gun, with the methodical care of a watchmaker. She adjusted the straps of her helmet, her movements economical and sure. There was no wasted energy, no theatricality. It was the pure, distilled essence of a professional preparing for work. The lead instructor, a grizzled Marine gunner who had seen it all, approached her. He looked from her to the grim-faced commander, then back to her. "You ready, petty officer?" he asked, his voice low and respectful. Sharma simply nodded once, her eyes already scanning the entrance to the gauntlet. "Understood," she said. Her voice was clear, calm, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was the only word she had spoken. The buzzer sounded, a harsh, metallic scream that signaled the start of the simulation. And then she was gone. She didn't charge in. She flowed. She moved through the first doorway with a predatory smoothness that was breathtaking to watch. The first hostile, a man easily twice her size, burst from a side room, swinging a padded baton. The crowd tensed. This was the scenario Thorne had described, the massive, unexpected threat. But Sharma didn't freeze. She didn't retreat. She met the attack with a symphony of controlled violence. She parried the clumsy swing, not by blocking it, but by redirecting the man's momentum, using his own force to pull him off balance. In the same fluid motion, she delivered 3 lightning-fast, precise strikes with her blue gun to his helmet and chest, then drove an elbow into a pressure point in his neck. The instructor, a seasoned combat veteran, grunted in genuine surprise and pain, collapsing to the mat. The entire engagement took less than 2 seconds. She was already moving, scanning the next room before the first opponent had fully registered what had happened. She moved through the structure like water, finding the path of least resistance, yet striking with the force of a tidal wave. 2 more hostiles emerged from opposite sides of a narrow hallway. It was a classic ambush. For most, it would have been the end of the run. For Sharma, it was just another geometric problem to be solved. She dropped to one knee, making herself a smaller target and causing the 2 attackers to hesitate for a microsecond, their lines of fire momentarily tangled. It was all the time she needed. She engaged the first target, then pivoted with impossible speed and engaged the second. 2 down. She cleared the rest of the structure with the same ruthless efficiency. Each movement was calculated. Each shot was precise. Each decision was instantaneous and correct. She was not just fighting. She was orchestrating a ballet of violence with herself as the sole, flawless performer. When she emerged from the final door, the timer was still running. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers as they looked at the large digital clock on the wall. She hadn't just beaten the record. She had shattered it. She had completed the gauntlet in less than half the time of the next best operator. The aftermath of her run was a repeat of the day before, but amplified. The silence was absolute, deafening. No one moved. No one spoke. They just stared, first at the impossible time on the clock, then at the woman who stood calmly at the exit of the gauntlet, breathing as if she had just returned from a light jog. Her uniform was barely disheveled. There wasn't a single bead of sweat on her brow. She methodically cleared her blue gun and handed it back to the instructor, her expression as neutral and unreadable as ever. The spell was finally broken by the Marine gunner. He took the weapon, looked at it, then looked at her. He slowly, deliberately removed his own helmet. He held it under his arm and simply nodded at her, a gesture of profound professional respect from one warrior to another. It was a small act, but in the rigid, hierarchical world of the military, it spoke volumes. It was an acknowledgement that transcended rank and service branch. It was a salute. Commander Thorne watched from the back of the room, the cane digging into his palm. The last vestiges of his arrogance had been sandblasted away, leaving behind only the raw, painful truth. He had not just been wrong. He had been spectacularly, historically wrong. He had committed the cardinal sin of a leader. He had judged a warrior by the cover, not the content. His prejudice had made him blind, and his blindness had led him to this moment of utter, public humiliation. He had thought he was testing her, but she had been testing him, and he had failed in every conceivable way. His mind replayed her movements in the gauntlet, the impossible efficiency, the cold, detached precision. It was a level of skill he had only ever heard about in hushed, reverent tones, the kind of mastery that belonged to the shadows, to the tip of the spear, to the Tier 1 operators who were more myth than man. The idea that this quiet, unassuming woman could be one of them was so far outside his reality that his mind struggled to accept it, even now, with the undeniable proof displayed on the scoreboard. He felt a presence beside him and turned to see Admiral Vance. The Admiral hadn't moved from his observation post, his eyes still fixed on Sharma. He held a small, hardened tablet in his hand. He hadn't said a word throughout the entire evolution, but his presence had lent a solemn gravity to the proceedings. He was not just an observer, he was a judge. "Commander," Vance said, his voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable weight of command. It cut through the murmuring crowd like a knife. A word. He beckoned Thorne to a small, private office just off the training floor. The walk was the longest of Thorne's life. Every eye was on him, on his limping gait, on his ashen face. He felt like a prisoner being led to his sentencing. Inside the office, the Admiral closed the door, shutting out the noise of the crowd. He didn't invite Thorne to sit. He simply turned and looked at him, his expression one of deep, profound disappointment. "Do you know who that is, Commander?" Vance asked, his voice dangerously calm. Thorne shook his head, his throat suddenly dry. "She's Petty Officer First Class Anya Sharma, Admiral. That's all I know." Vance tapped the screen of his tablet and turned it to face Thorne. A personnel file was displayed. At the top was a photograph of Sharma, the same impassive face staring back. But below were lines of text that made the air leave Thorne's lungs. It was a litany of excellence, a resume of quiet heroism that was almost impossible to comprehend. Each line was a blow, a further testament to his own staggering ignorance. The list of qualifications was a blur of acronyms that represented the most elite and demanding schools the military had to offer. Bud/S, SQT, SEER, Jump School, Dive School, Sniper School. He saw decorations that he had only ever seen in glass cases at military museums. The screen glowed with the stark, undeniable text, a digital monument to Thorne's catastrophic misjudgment. Unit, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. The name itself, the operational title for what the world knew as SEAL Team 6, was a thunderclap in the silent room. It was the apex predator of the special operations world, a unit so secretive and so lethal that its very existence was a matter of official ambiguity. Thorne felt a wave of nausea. He hadn't just insulted a sailor. He had insulted a national asset, a practitioner of a lethal art so refined that she belonged to a class of warrior numbering only a few hundred in the entire world. He continued to read, his eyes scanning the list of deployments. Afghanistan, Iraq, Horn of Africa, the Philippines. The locations were a roll call of the last 2 decades of shadow wars, the unnamed, unseen conflicts fought in the dark corners of the globe. Her combat hours were astronomical, a number that dwarfed the totals of entire conventional companies. Then came the awards, each one a story of unimaginable valor. Navy Cross, the second highest award for bravery in the nation, awarded for an action in the Hindu Kush Mountains that was so heavily redacted it was almost unreadable. All he could make out were phrases like overwhelming enemy force, compromised position, and complete disregard for personal safety. He saw a silver star, and then another. He saw a bronze star with a V for valor, and then 3 more. He saw a purple heart, an indicator that this quiet professional had bled for her country on a battlefield he could only imagine in his worst nightmares. The final line on the screen was perhaps the most chilling of all. Mission classifications, Tier 1, TS/Psi, EUM. It was the holy trinity of secrecy, a level of clearance that meant her life's work was known only to a handful of people and would remain a state secret for generations. Commander Thorne looked up from the tablet, his face ashen. The woman he had derided as an administrative assistant was, in fact, one of the most decorated and combat-proven operators in the entire United States military. His words, his smug, condescending pronouncements, now echoed in his mind as a chorus of pure, undiluted foolishness. He had stood on the shore and mocked the tide, utterly oblivious to the tsunami of competence that was about to wash him away. Admiral Vance let the silence hang in the air for a long moment, allowing the full weight of the revelation to settle on Thorne. She was the lead breacher on Operation Nightfall, Vance said, his voice low and reverent. My son was the JTAC on that mission. His team was pinned down, taking heavy fire, completely cut off. Her 4-person team was diverted from another objective. They fast-roped onto a hot LZ, fought their way through 2 city blocks of entrenched hostiles, and got my son and what was left of his squad out. According to the after-action report, which I have read 50 times, Petty Officer Sharma personally neutralized 17 enemy combatants, treated 3 critical casualties under fire, and coordinated the exfil, all while wounded herself. She never raised her voice. She never hesitated. She just worked. The Admiral paused, his eyes distant, lost in a memory of a prayer answered in the dead of night by a quiet woman he had never met until today. My son is alive because of her. He has a family. He has a future. All because that woman, who you decided was not a war fighter, did her job with a level of skill and courage that you, Commander, cannot possibly comprehend. Vance finally turned his gaze back to Thorne, and the disappointment had been replaced by a cold, hard anger. Respect, Commander Thorne, is not a function of size or volume. It is a function of competence. It is earned in moments like that, in the dark, when no one is watching. It is not earned by preening on a training mat in front of junior sailors. You mistook her silence for weakness. You should have recognized it for what it was. The profound, unshakable confidence of someone who has nothing to prove to anyone, least of all to you. Vance stepped past him and opened the door. The crowd outside fell silent again, their attention snapping to the 2 officers. The Admiral walked directly onto the training floor, straight towards Sharma, who was now quietly stretching in a corner, already focused on her post-evolution cooldown. He stopped a few feet in front of her. Petty Officer Anya Sharma rose to her feet and stood at a relaxed parade rest. Admiral Jonathan Vance, a 3-star flag officer, a man who commanded fleets and advised presidents, raised his hand to his brow in a slow, perfect salute. It was not the perfunctory gesture exchanged between ranks. It was a mark of the deepest and most profound respect one warrior can show another. "Petty Officer Sharma," he said, his voice ringing with authority and emotion. "It is an honor. On behalf of my family and a grateful nation, thank you for your service." Sharma, for the first time, showed a flicker of emotion, a brief, almost imperceptible softening of her eyes. She returned the salute with crisp precision. "Just doing my job, Admiral," she replied. Her voice was quiet, but in the now reverent silence of the room, it was the loudest thing anyone had ever heard. The story of what happened on the training deck, of the quiet petty officer and the humbled commander, spread through the joint service base like a shockwave. It wasn't transmitted through official channels or after-action reports. It traveled on the currency of military life, gossip, rumor, and legend. It was whispered in the chow halls, recounted in the barracks late at night, and debated in the smoky haze of off-base bars. Every telling added a new layer of myth, a new detail that magnified the core, undeniable truth of the event. In the Marine barracks, they called her the Ghost, a silent operator who had materialized from the shadows to enforce a brutal lesson in humility. The Air Force pilots, who valued precision above all else, spoke of her run in the gauntlet in hushed, reverent tones, comparing her economy of motion to the flawless flight path of a stealth fighter. The Army Rangers, who knew a thing or two about elite operators, just nodded knowingly. They recognized the archetype. They had seen men like her, and now a woman, before, the quiet professionals who let their actions do the talking. The legend became a teaching tool. Senior NCOs would tell the story to new recruits as a parable about the dangers of assumption. Drill instructors used Commander Thorne's name as a cautionary tale, a synonym for arrogant ignorance. His public humiliation became a lesson for thousands. Thorne, for his part, accepted his new role with a surprising degree of grace. The experience had not just humbled him, it had broken him down and rebuilt him. The man who emerged was quieter, more thoughtful, and infinitely more respectful. The first thing he did was seek out Sharma. He found her in the base library, reading a thick, technical manual on advanced electronics. He approached her quietly, cane in hand, his posture no longer arrogant but deferential. He apologized. It wasn't a grudging, forced apology, but a genuine and heartfelt admission of his own prejudice and ignorance. He asked her to forgive him. Sharma looked up from her book, her expression as calm as ever. She listened to him without interruption. When he was finished, she simply nodded. "We all have our blind spots, Commander," she said. "The important thing is to learn from them." Apology accepted, and that was it. There was no lecture, no recrimination, just a simple, professional acceptance. But Thorne didn't stop there. He became a quiet champion for her philosophy. A few weeks later, during a briefing for a new training program, a young, cocky lieutenant made a dismissive comment about a female intelligence analyst contribution. Before anyone else could react, Thorne spoke up, his voice low but firm. "Lieutenant," he said, cutting the young officer off, "let me tell you a story about making assumptions." And he recounted the entire event, casting himself as the villain, the fool who mistook a lioness for a lamb. He finished by saying, "The most dangerous person in the room is almost never the loudest. Remember that." The lieutenant was silenced, his face burning with shame. The lesson had been passed on. The change was palpable across the entire training command. Instructors began to emphasize precision over brute force, technique over aggression. They started looking for the quiet ones, the observers, the thinkers, recognizing that true strength often came in the most unassuming packages. The physical space itself became a monument to the event. The large training mat where Thorne had been humbled was unofficially christened the Sharma deck. Recruits would tap its edge for good luck before starting a drill. It was treated with a new kind of reverence, a place where a fundamental truth about the nature of a warrior had been revealed in the most dramatic way possible. Sharma, of course, wanted nothing to do with the legend. She deflected any praise, avoided any discussion of the incident, and continued her work with the same quiet, focused dedication as always. She was often seen in the gym, long after everyone else had gone, patiently coaching younger sailors, both male and female, on the finer points of hand-to-hand combat. She never raised her voice. She never boasted. She simply demonstrated, corrected, and encouraged, teaching them that the foundation of all combat skill was not anger or aggression, but balance, discipline, and a quiet mind. A photograph eventually surfaced, taken by someone on the observation deck with their phone. It was a grainy, low-resolution image, but it captured the moment perfectly. Admiral Vance, ramrod straight, his hand in a crisp salute, and Petty Officer Sharma returning it with equal precision. The photo was printed out and pinned to the main bulletin board in the training center's headquarters. Beneath it, someone had written in black marker, "Competence is the only rank that matters." The image became an icon, a visual shorthand for the story, a constant reminder that the measure of a warrior is not found in their boasts, but in their actions, not in their appearance, but in their abilities, and not in the volume of their voice, but in the deafening silence of their proven skill. The ripple effects of that single day continued to spread, creating a legacy that was far more enduring than a simple story. The culture of the entire Joint Service Command began a slow but undeniable shift away from the chest-thumping bravado of the past towards a more measured, performance-based ethos. The Sharma Protocol, as it informally came to be known, was integrated into the instructor training curriculum. It was a simple principle: evaluate every trainee based solely on their demonstrated skill and their willingness to learn, stripping away all preconceived notions based on gender, size, or service branch. It led to a more effective, more lethal, and more cohesive fighting force. Commander Thorne, once the symbol of arrogant gatekeeping, became its most ardent opponent. He dedicated the remainder of his career to championing undervalued and underestimated personnel. He sought out the quiet, methodical technicians, the introverted but brilliant analysts, the physically unassuming but mentally tough operators. He built teams based on competence, not conformity, and his units consistently outperformed all others. His own legend was rewritten. He was no longer the fool who got humbled on the mat, but the wise leader who learned the most important lesson of his life and had the courage to change. He and Sharma developed a relationship of deep, mutual professional respect. They never spoke of the incident again, but it was the bedrock upon which their strange alliance was built. He would occasionally consult with her on training methodologies, and she would provide concise, brutally honest, and invariably correct feedback. She remained, as always, the consummate professional, an operator who had returned to the world of training for a brief period before she would inevitably disappear again into the classified world she truly inhabited. A year after the incident, a new class of recruits was gathered on the Sharma deck. They stood in nervous formation, their uniforms stiff, their faces a mixture of fear and excitement. An older, wiser Commander Thorne stood before them, his cane now gone, his posture straight and confident, but his eyes holding a new humility. He didn't shout. He didn't try to intimidate them. He spoke to them calmly, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned experience. "Look around you," he began. "You all come from different places. You look different. You sound different. And your instincts will tell you to make judgments based on those differences. Your instincts will tell you to size each other up, to look for weakness, to establish a pecking order based on who is the biggest, the loudest, the most aggressive. I am here today to tell you that your instincts are wrong." He paused, letting the words sink in. "This place," he said, stomping his foot on the mat, "is a place of truth. The mat doesn't care about your ego. The timer doesn't care about your excuses. This place, and the battlefield it prepares you for, only cares about one thing: what you can do. Your competence, your discipline, your ability to perform under pressure." He then told them the story. He told them about his own arrogance, his own blindness. He told them about a quiet petty officer who taught him that a warrior's spirit is not measured in decibels. He told them about her impossible skill, her unbreakable calm. and her profound humility. He pointed to the grainy photograph still pinned to the bulletin board. Your goal here is not to be the toughest person in the room, he concluded, his voice dropping to an almost reverent whisper. It is to be the most professional. Your legacy will not be defined by the medals on your chest or the stories you tell in a bar. It will be defined by the quiet competence you bring to your work, by the teammates you help bring home, by the standard you set for those who follow. That is the lesson of this deck. That is the lesson of Petty Officer Sharma. As he finished, the recruits were silent, their expressions transformed. The fear was still there, but it was now mixed with a sense of awe and a dawning understanding. They were standing on hallowed ground, at the beginning of a journey that would test them in ways they couldn't imagine. They were the next generation, and the story of the quiet operator had now become a part of their DNA, a foundational myth for the new kind of warrior they were expected to become. The true legacy wasn't a photograph on a wall or a name given to a training mat. It was the continuation of an ideal, a philosophy passed from one generation to the next. It was the understanding that true strength is quiet, that respect is earned through action, and that the most profound statement a warrior can ever make is the silent, perfect execution of their duty. For more stories where competence triumphs over arrogance and where quiet professionalism defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.